Hi, I'm Chris Lukenbiel, and we're dealing with marginal elements. And the last topic that we have to discuss is how to represent scale and direction on a legend, and some of the issues associated with that in terms of designing, design elements, if you will. So with scale, we have it on most maps. Not all maps need scale. It really just depends on your use and what you're trying to show. But remember that there's three different ways that we can represent scale. We can do as a graphic, as a representative fraction, or we can do it just as a verbal statement. 1 centimeter equals 0.685 kilometers, for instance. When we're designing a map, traditional map, typically the graphic scales are the best because they can be the most useful, that we can get a feel for a distance by looking at that line, and then using our eyes we can do estimates on the map of how far away things are, how long will it take to get there based on that distance. Also, one of the nice things about graphic scale bars is that once you put the graphic scale on a map, when you print out maps or you use it in different mediums, the graphic scale bar always stays consistent with the size. So if I took a map and printed it at 130%, blew it up, made it bigger, the graphic scale bar would be accurate, but the verbal and the representative fractions would no longer be accurate because they only reflected the original data. So detailed scale bars are best for maps that focus on directional measurement. So you don't always need a real detailed scale. And you have to remember too that when you're using scale, and this is one of the most common errors I see all the time on maps, is to round up. That don't do a poor scale bar is 0 to 8.46 miles. Do you think, I don't know how big 8.46 miles is, but I can have a pretty good idea what 10 miles is or what 5 miles is. Even with this one, 4 miles is not as good as, or 4 kilometers, it's not as good as 5 kilometers. So you always want to use whole numbers and at increments of 5 usually, or at 10. And finally, you got to remember that on small scale maps, scale is not always going to be constant, that it'll vary throughout a map. So it's usually not good to put a scale bar on a small scale map, or that there can be some explanation of how scale is varying on the map, and based on where the standard lines or standard points are located. Let's now take a look at direction north arrows and those choices. So there's many different choices to choose from, especially with the Esri font. Esri cartography font is what it's called. Rarely the most important feature on a map, so it should always be very low in the visual hierarchy. That means don't make a big north arrow, please. And the visual hierarchy is extremely important, that these are marginal elements for a reason. We want to know where north is, especially when your map doesn't orient itself towards north, that if we have north as looking to the left or the right on the map, it becomes a very important item to have. But it's not something that you really need. So in terms of the visual hierarchy, even with the north arrow, we need to think of its size, its location on the map, and the style that is used, the different type of font item that is used. And I have my own personal saying that you always goose the end, that the end always goes on the top with the arrow pointing into it. And you see it on most north arrows, but not all. But that's an old cartographic convention. So you don't always need a north arrow on a map. And this is especially true when we have the global graticule on it, because then the global graticule is always pointing to due north, right? And if we put a north arrow on this map and we just had it pointing straight up, it would actually be inaccurate because north is only straight up right here in the middle. If we got way over here, we're not pointing straight north. So be careful with small scale maps and north arrows.